videos, doing research and research. But honestly, the quickest and fastest way to get it done and just go from that toying with the idea, flirting to maybe 25, 30% kind of assurance of, yeah, I think I'm going to do it, to stop wasting time, dude. Let's go to 90%. Just come in one quick week. We're going to immerse you into El Salvador culture, where you will see what it's like to live here, not necessarily be a tourist. This is a different kind of tour. This is not a tour of like, oh, just come see the really fun, sparkly stuff. No, this is a tour that actually gives you an experience of what it's like to live in a foreign country, specifically, and El Salvador's culture and their people and what it's like to be an expat. And so it's a very different kind of tour. But after our tours, our people know for sure. They're at 90%. Yes, this is the place for me. I'm going to be here next month. Or it's like, that's it. I just got to go home, wrap up my stuff, pack it up, and I'm here. Or they're like, you know what? No, I think I'm going to go try Mexico, or I'm going to go try, Panama or Costa, or look somewhere else. And that's great, because what matters the most is that you are going to the place that fit is the best fit for you. I'm not going to get on here and say like, oh, El Salvador is just so great and it's so wonderful and it's perfect for you and you have to be here. Um, Dude, I don't know you. I don't know what exactly it is you're looking for. All I can do and what my purpose is, I'm here to serve you, to show you what El Salvador is like, and you are here need to decide if it could be a good fit for you. And then once you come on our tour, like, this is a big thing, the last day, it's not just if you like El Salvador, if you like our vibe, but it's also about, are you a good fit for El Salvador? Because honestly, those colony days are long gone. And as you may have seen in Africa and other various old colonized nations, um, they're not going to be treated like a colony anymore. So some foreigners come down with a little bit of entitlement, thinking that colonization kind of mindset, thinking that's still how things are. And it's not. It's not. So it's also not just about if you like El Salvador, but if you are the right fit for El Salvador. Because we have, I mean, this was before. The reason why we started the tours is because we had clients that came because I heard all the hype and everything on the internet about all the big changes that have happened in the country. And then they got here and they tried it out for a year, and then they called us up and they said, well, I didn't understand about this. I didn't know it was going to be like this. And this isn't the right place for me. I think I'm going back home. And that's extremely costly. And it's a good thing to know for sure, instead of sitting there in doubt and wonder all the time. But we started these tours in order to help and to help you be make a more educated, conscious decision in this big life changing type of decision. So yeah. And so one of my clients, so this week we're going to talk about driving to El Salvador, because one of our clients has called us up and said, Jen, I've talked to a few other YouTubers, Nikki and James, and I think I want to come down, but I want to bring my stuff, because President Bukele just put out that diaspora that are coming back have certain permissions. They can bring like a car, they can bring a certain amount of household and household goods up to a certain price line, that will not have any customs requirements at all. Whereas before, honestly, if you were bringing in your car, it almost wasn't worth it because you had to pay like something like 40% of the car's value just in customs fees. So most of our clients before we've said, not worth it to bring your car. But with this new exception that President Bukele has made towards diaspora and Salvadorans that are moving back, that they can bring a car and not have to pay the customs, that's on a lot of people's minds. Is, hey, how do I drive down there? Because I mean, you can do an auto transport and you can ship your car down to El Salvador, but I mean, why not fill it with some of your most precious stuff and drive it down? Because I mean, technically, driving wise, it's about the same as driving, say, Seattle, Florida. Actually, I think it's less than that distance, but I'd say days wise, it's probably about time wise, it's probably about the same as doing like a Seattle, Florida. But distance wise, it's a lot shorter. But the highways aren't as they're not 70 they're not 70 75 miles per hour in Central America. So so let's start with that. First of all, I will share my experience because I drove down through Central America back in 2021, and that is how I ran into El Salvador and ended up falling in love with El Salvador and finding out that that was the right place for me. Um, and it all started with crossing the border into Mexico. And the border into Mexico is, and this is a little different because we were kind of in COVID times when I crossed. And so the border was pretty empty. Um, because I mean, everybody was kind of closed up and inside in 2021 still. Everybody's still really cautious um, about going out. And technically, Mexico was still kind of like a no travel. Like, we don't want tourists coming in, we don't want COVID spread. And whenever I had to cross into a new country, I had to do a new round of COVID tests for me and my kids to go through before we could go into the next country. Um, yeah, therefore, there wasn't a lot of people crossing the border because who wants to pay for another COVID test? Um, so my border experience was pretty chill. Was pretty chill. But one thing I need to mention is the first time I tried to cross the Mexican border on my way to El Salvador is I had a trailer. I had a trailer with all of my stuff in it. And it was a very small trailer. And so in my state where I was from, Florida, I didn't have to have a license plate because they have a certain range of, like, if your trailer's really small, you don't have to have a license plate um, if it's, you know, if it's not up to a certain capacity. So I didn't have a license plate. That was a no go for them. And so I ended up having to turn around from the border, go back, and I had to sell everything in the trailer and sell the trailer itself before I could cross down. So you really need to make sure you get all your paperwork lined up before you cross down into Central America. Because every time you go into a new country, you have to get a tip, and you get kind of two kind of permissions. One, you get a permission, you get like a visa for yourself to go through that country, and then you also have to get, it's kind of like a visa for your car to go, and certain permission for your car to go through that country too. And if you want the best information about all of this, about exactly what papers you need, it's typically your car registration. It's usually proof of insurance. You have to get Mexican insurance when you're driving through Mexico. Um, Usually, your US insurance does not cover it unless that is specifically specified by your US insurance company. Make sure it's specified. Um, and you have to have, valid driver's license, identification, your passport, all those kinds of things. One of the greatest resources that I can tell you about is a Facebook group called Pan Am, Pan American Highway Travelers Facebook group. And these are people that are currently they're going somewhere from Alaska all the way down to Argentina. They're riding the Pan American Highway, that is the longest highway in the Western Hemisphere, that goes all the way from Alaska to the top of the world, all the way to the bottom of the world. And so on that Facebook group, you can get live, up to date notices about, hey, I'm crossing through this country. I heard there's a whole lot of political unrest. Is anybody there? Does anybody know how much that's affecting travel or life? Um, and so everybody else in that group, anybody who's there can say, yeah, it's terrible, don't do it, or it was nothing. For example, me, when I was driving down, Nicaragua had just, they were preparing for their presidential, or they're having their presidential elections. And, Nicaragua is a country where you don't talk about the government. Freedom of speech is not a luxury they have. And so there were reports of that they were throwing people in jail. They were throwing protesters to the president in jail, and that things were in an upheaval. And but then when I got in the group, there were people in Grenada, there were people in Nika that said, no, it's just in the capital. Just, go around the bypass and you'll have no problems. And so I did that. And I had no problems. It was beautiful. I mean, Nicaragua it's gorgeous. I mean, the highways are really nice. It's just undiscovered paradisical beauty in Nicaragua. I was really surprised at what a beautiful country it was. Um, but yeah, because you can't always, you can, hello, as much as we'd love to trust the internet, and we get all of our information from the internet, and we meet people who have been there on the internet. um it's also, your source is so important. I mean, technically El Salvador is still, ranked by the US government as being dangerous and terrible. And I can tell you from being in El Salvador and being in the US is way more dangerous than El Salvador is. But for some reason, the government keeps El Salvador on, I don't know, the third world list, and it's do not travel and it's dangerous, which doesn't make any sense with reality. Thank you, YouTube, for bringing us up to date reality. Um, so anyway, so yes, Pan American Writers Facebook group, super super great book group that can give you updates. Now, if you were planning on coming down now, as opposed to when I drove down from the US down to El Salvador, I think now it's a totally different ballpark because of all the immigrants and because of all the people that are crossing the border. I crossed at a tiny little town called Eagles Pass. And so the border check was this small little border check, just had two lanes that that your cars had to go into. I mean, it was like nothing like Laredo, or um, big, one of those big crossing places where it's complicated and everybody's getting across there. Um, but I also saw that recently my little Eagles Pass, where I passed through before, it's one of the easier places to kind of cross the Rio Grande. It's not like that shallow. It's kind of shallow and stuff. And so I saw a notice about Eagles Pass being kind of dangerous, and some people had died because some illegals were trying to cross the river, and there's just a flood of people that was trying to cross there. And yeah, so you really got to be up to date on what's happening and where you're going to cross. And that's why I would turn to the Pan American Highway Facebook group that you can join totally for free. Because with all the immigration and, well, the borders being fairly open, I'd say anything within a good 4 or 5 hours of the border, I would zoom through. That's kind of what I did. I was definitely praying a ton and being guided on my trip. And I crossed over at 6 a.m. in the morning. And the minute I was over to the other side, I stopped at the grocery store, got some breakfast, got snacks and food for my girls, and then we drove. And it was drive, 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 don't stop. So I drove about 14 to 16 hours. I drove all the way down to, I think it's Torreon, I think, because we were heading down to Guanajuato. And so, yeah, I drove all day and we didn't stop for anything except for bathroom breaks. The other big thing is when you're driving down through Mexico, um, drive on, I, this is just my personal opinion, drive on the paid highways. The toll roads are expensive. You're going to pay anywhere from $200 to $300 in tolls, but the toll roads are empty. They're empty. The speed limit is kind of one of those, it's like a guide, you could say. Um, there's the road is beautiful, it's clear, and there's barely anybody on it. And nobody really bugs you. There's a few rest areas along the way, and of course there's gas stations that you can pull off at to refuel and recharge. And honestly, northern Mexico, it's kind of boring. It's a lot of cactus. That's an extension of Arizona. So there's not really a lot that you're gonna want to stop and sightsee per se. Um, so that is what I did. I went and I drove like nobody's business, getting away from the border. And then we, sorry, once we got, um, once we were down to Torreon, the next thing is about, okay, well, where do I stay? Because everybody says, okay, only drive during the day, drive during daylight time. That's another really good tip. And the next thing is when you stay, make sure you are staying at something that has security and is gated and enclosed. So I stopped at Airbnbs. I stayed at either an Airbnb or a hotel that had a secure gated parking lot. Um, or I think my first Airbnb in Torreon, I I stayed in, it was an Airbnb that was in a gated neighborhood. So I pulled in there. It was kind of late. It was like almost 10. But if you see the map, there's like nowhere to stop around around there when you're coming from the north. So I had to drive until 10. And then I went in right into the Airbnb, went past the security guard gate. We parked and then we crashed there, and we got up early the next morning and headed off again until we got to Guanajuato. And Guanajuato was, we felt a lot safer in Guanajuato. Everything was very chill. It's a beautiful, gorgeous, really cool town. I highly recommend, if you're gonna visit Mexico, visit Guanajuato. It is, yeah, it's pretty cool. So let's see. Next tip when it comes to driving down. So one, stay and keep your car in gated, secured areas to avoid theft. The other thing is to, when it comes to traffic stops, there will be traffic stops. There's also, um, they just have, the cops are just kind of in the middle of the road. They have a bunch of cones up and they kind of flag you down and you have to pull over. Now, typically they are looking for a bribe. Yep, that's just how it is. So you can either pay them off and you'll be on your way. When we got pulled over one time, my daughter, my 18-year-old was driving, and she when she got pulled over, we had this little plan of called playing the dumb gringa. And so even though she's got okay Spanish, decent Spanish, not great Spanish, but okay. Uh, so when he pulled her over, she was just she didn't pretend to understand any Spanish, and she just played the dumb blonde young gringa, and it's like, "Hi, how can I help you?" And she gave him her driver's license, and then after he took the driver's license, he didn't speak any English, so he's trying to communicate to her that she has to pay a fine, and then and she was like, "Oh, okay. Where do I have to pay my fine?" and he was like, well, you'd have to go to the courthouse, and today's a Thursday, and the judge isn't going to be there today or tomorrow, so you're going to have to wait all the way until Monday to pay your fine. But if you don't want to do that, well, we could just take care of it here, and then you could be on your way. So the thing was that, one, they took her driver's license and they kind of want to give it back. So that was one thing. And then two, they were just like, well, no, the judge isn't there. And she was like, oh. And so she just kept with the dumb gringa thing. And she's like, okay, well, can you show me where I have to go on Monday? She's like, that's okay. They're like, well, you don't want to wait until Monday. Why don't we just take care of that right now? And she was just like, no, that's okay. That's fine. We can hang out until Monday. And can you show me on the map where I need to go, to pay my fine and stuff? And so the typical pressure situations weren't really working. And he got really frustrated with the fact that she didn't know any Spanish. And so, and they do, his commandant, or his sergeant, kind of came around and opened up our van and checked out our van. And once he saw it was, it was a mom and some daughters, that's another thing that I've noticed in driving through Latin America. If there's a male in the car, the dynamic is totally different. Totally different. If there's a male in the car, there seems to be like a power dynamic or something going on, an intimidation dynamic or something. But if there's no male in the car, then um, I don't know. I guess the gentleman in them comes out more. And yeah, and so after a while they just said, nah, forget it. And they gave her license back, and we went on the way. And I was still in my high high moralistic long, and so I'm like, I'm not gonna pay a bribe. And yeah, I look back, I think if I drove through now, I think I'd probably just pay it and keep on going and get through, because I'm not going to start any big movement by trying to do what's right in a country that's not even my country. So, anyway, so that's how the bribes work. Make sure you have lots of little extra cash. The other big thing is make sure your cash is dispersed in different parts of your car. Do not just have cash in your wallet, because very likely your wallet will be one of the first things that gets stolen. Make sure you have it hidden in different little emergency places, just in case you do get robbed. You can pull out something and be like, oh, there's my money, take my money. And they take it and they think they got it all. But you have reserves. So let's see. That's it. So that's about the police stops. The other thing is topes. Topes. That is the first Spanish curse word my children learned on our way down from the US. And a tope is a speed bump in Mexico. But the speed bumps there are like, they're huge and they're not wide. They're like small, but they're tall. And they have them on like 60-mile-per-hour highways. This is not like slow zone to go through the neighborhood. No, you're driving along on a 60-mile-per-hour highway, and they'll have, usually, most of the time, they have a little sign that says tope, or it'll have a little sign of a speed bump a little bit before the actual speed bump. Okay. And sometimes there's no sign. And so all of a sudden, your backseat gets launched. I mean, and my girls learned quick that you use your seatbelt anytime the car is in motion in any country, regardless of if you think you're going to get pulled over or not. Because sometimes, my kids would unbuckle to go get something out of their bag, and then they forget to rebuckle. And then we'd hit a tope. And honestly, by the time, that was a massive learning curve. And by the time I got down to Puerto Escondido, my struts and my shocks were dead. In fact, I had to order um, new shocks from the US and have them shipped down to Puerto Escondido to get them replaced in my van. Now, I came down in a kind of pimped out passenger van. So I had four-wheel drive and off-road tires with like a 6-inch lift, and she's a big E350 Ford passenger van. And so she's pretty intimidating in Latin America. Most things aren't as big and bold as Blanquita was. So, and she had a sportsmobile top on the top, so we could stop and camp, if we wanted to, which we did in Guatemala, um, and I think we did it once in Mexico too. I'm forgetting now, but anyway, so that was a vehicle I was coming down. So I did have a little bit of that shock effect advantage on my side because typically when I drove up in Blanquita, people were like, "Whoa, what is this big massive thing?" And then hello, this little blondie gringa, you know, jumps down and says Spanish, "Oh, aquí está, ¿dónde está?" Where's the latest gas station? And they're just like, "Oh, it's over there." And I'm like, "Okay, gracias, thanks." And so I was kind of there. By the time they kind of got over their shock of what they just saw, um, I was usually gone. So, um, but anyway, but as I said, on the Pan American Highway Riders Facebook page, you'll find people doing big old buses that they've gutted out and renovated. I mean, RVs. The biggest one I've ever seen was the Jaja bus. You can look them up. Jajabus. They're a French couple from I think Quebec or Ontario. I met them when they were coming through, and they had a full length tour bus that they had completely renovated. Gorgeous, beautiful, beautiful bus that they were driving down, and I think they're all the way to Panama now. But you can look them up on Instagram. She's really active, really cool lady. Um, but I think they're turning around because FYI, another thing is as you can drive down to Panama, you can't get through the Darien Gap, and you don't necessarily want to try. That is a very dangerous place. So, what you do is once you get to Panama, typically what happens is you ship your RV or your car or your pimped out car over to Colombia, and then you follow driving on your journey down through South America. And also on my channel, you can see there's a video called driving down to El Salvador that I did with generic Eric Peterson. He is a motorcycle. He's a guy riding a motorcycle all the way down to Argentina, and so he gives a few clues about his experience driving down through Central America. Okay, last thing we're going to talk is about borders. So when you get to the border in Guatemala, or you get to the border, you get to the El Salvador border. Now, one less thing that you will need, you won't need a COVID test. Yay! Be grateful for that. Because I had to go to a lab and get COVID tests for me and my girls before we could cross into the next border. Okay, now when you're pulling up to the border, typically there can be a long line of trucks. Do not stay behind the trucks. Okay, traffic laws in Central America are kind of like suggestions more than they're like the rule. Okay, so if there's a long line of trucks, you go in the opposite lane until there is a car coming towards you. Then you kind of pull off to the shoulder. You let the person that has the right of way go by, and then you go back in the lane and you go on and you pass those trucks because those trucks are waiting for the shipping truck lane to go through the border. The cars have a different lane to go through the border to the new country. So yeah, I sat for a good little while behind those trucks, being a good little girl sitting in line, and we didn't go anywhere. And I see all these other people, all these other cars going by, and I'm like, "You're driving down the wrong side of the road." And yeah, as I said, more of a suggestion than a hard law of the land. So, um, I definitely recommend going through borders. Start early in the morning. Know the exchange rate, because you are a foreigner, you're going to get tagged as a foreigner, and there are money exchangers. If you don't already have money in the new currency like quetzales, then there are money exchangers there. They'll be like, "Hey, I can change your pesos for quetzales." And if you shop around a few different ones, you can get a decent rate. I wouldn't necessarily take the first guy that comes up to you, um, unless you know what the going rate is. And of course, you're not going to get, what you would get at a bank. You're going to get something a little bit more. Just my recommendation is get enough to get through immigration. And once you get into the country, you can go to an ATM and get some more quetzales out. Um, in order to get what you need once you're in the country and you know what you're doing. I wouldn't necessarily do a big, massive money interchange right there at the border, because borders are always a little bit wild westy. And if you're changing a couple $1,000s, you might get kind of like earmarked of, hey, follow that guy in. Um, he got some change. So, um, So yeah, I would use the money changers, get enough to cover your fees to go on the border. Oh, and also what sometimes they'll do is they will spray and clean the undercarriage of your car to make sure you're not bringing any invasive plant species or stuff into, and they'll spray chemicals around the bottom too into their country. That can be part of the process. And typically, always what it is you go in first and you do your personal immigration with your passport, and your ID and stuff. Once you've done your personal immigration, um, you then you go around to the part where you have to kind of check out your car, your vehicle. Now, something else you I didn't understand until I did this is you have to kind of check out of your last country, and then you cross the border and you check in to the next country. Um, so you have to go through the immigration checkout process, say in Mexico, and then once you cross into Guatemala, you go through the check-in process in Guatemala of, again, immigration for the people, and then the tip and the things that you need um, for your car or your vehicle. So let me think. I'm trying to think what else I can possibly tell you about going down there. I already said go early in the morning so you can get kind of into your destination. Do not trust Waze or a map when it says, "Oh, you can get there with just in 2 hours." Um, no, uh, they no, because the roads down there are not at all like roads up north. As I warned you about, Mexico's got the topes and they've got random stops. If you stay on the 4-lane highways, I mean, things are pretty clear. You can make decent time. But in Guatemala, oh my goodness, Guatemala has terrible roads. In my personal opinion, Guatemala has terrible. I mean, there was potholes that you swore they're like, does this go to China? I mean, it's crazy, and they're typically very two laney. I only saw one 4-lane highway in Guatemala, and that was only for a little bit. It was around Guatemala City. Even though you're looking at, it's like, oh, well, it says there's a highway, honey. That highway's just a little 2-lane highway, and we sat in the we were going from Huehuetenango down to Lake Atitlan. We were supposed to stay there for the night, and it was just It was supposed to be a short little, crossover. It looked like it would take us maybe 2 hours top. It was 6 hours because in the past, from Huehuetenango, they were doing construction on this skinny little mountain road. And so we literally sat there for a good 2 hours in traffic. Everybody else was sitting there. Nobody's car was on. There was nothing you can do. You weren't about to actually turn around and go around the mountain because that probably would have taken you just as long. So there you are. And there's nothing you can do about it. Um, it was kind of freaky. That was not a good night for me. I was pretty freaked out by the time I got to Lake Atitlan. I was done for the day. But um but yeah, so there's a little bit of precautions, but once you get to El Salvador, you will be singing praises and hallelujah because El Salvador's roads are a lot like US roads. They have shoulders, they're nice and wide, they're 4 lane. I think in the 90s, I think the government, I think the US must have come down and helped them redo the road structure like after the war or something because I mean, I've traveled through a lot of countries, and El Salvador roads are the ones that, yeah, look the most like the U.S. roads. And I'm like, okay, there's definitely a relational impact here. Somebody, somebody told somebody else about our roads because these roads aren't like European roads. They're not like Mexico roads. They're like U.S. roads. So beautiful roads, though. You can go nice and quick, 60, 65, no problem. And you will love the roads in El Salvador. I'd say the majority of the roads are paved. The main roads are fine. Once you get off the main road to go down to a house or an Airbnb, yeah, maybe not so much, but not as bad as Honduras. That's all I'm saying. Um, okay, that is it. I will answer any questions you guys have, and then yeah, it's a little here. Sorry, I'm outside. I'm trying to get the sunlight, um, but not a whole lot I can do about that. I don't have my ring light. Sorry, Brian. But topes are also called túmulos. Thank you, Cesar. Topes are also in Central America. They're called túmulos. But we just call them speed bumps. What is the best time to make the trip? Overall, I'd say, that's a good question. I'd say not during rainy season. I'd say the best time to make the trip is not from May to November. So I'd say from November to May, kind of during winter season, I think would be the best time to make the trip because rainy season is from May to through October, and you definitely don't want to get stuck in. This is the tropics, so when they have a rainstorm, it's like full on. It's why they call it a shower and not just a rainstorm. It's it's a massive ton of water coming down, and yeah, I think that would be a little bit tougher to uh, to try and navigate the roads when you've got big downpours. Um, can we make the trip with pets? Yes, you can make the trip with pets, but you have to have the right requirements because just like I said before, when you cross the border, you have to go through, then you have to get your tip for your car to go through. Well, there's an additional step if you have a pet, where you have to have the right paperwork for your pets to go through the borders to where you're going to. So that's a whole nother additional step that's probably worth its own video, or you can look up each country individually about transporting your pets. Also, look on the Pan Am Highway, the Pan Am Highway Riders Facebook group. I'm sure they have like a standard post about pets in taking pets through each country and the requirements that are there. And there's another tip, like some countries you have to buy their insurance to get through. Like, for example, I told you about Mexico. Well, Nicaragua, they have specific Nicaragua insurance that you have to buy after you cross the border. And you think it's just another guy panhandling just trying to juice you for more money, but no, that's official. You need to pay an extra $15 for that Nicaraguan insurance because if you don't have it, the next police stop, there's a lot of police stops in Nicaragua. Um, and they always check your insurance and they always check your entry thing in Nicaragua. And you have to have that for there. So, last question. Can I register my car, SUV, RV in El Salvador? Okay. If you are moving down here and you are bringing your car, first thing you need to know is it needs to be less than 8 years old. You can only bring cars down that are less than 8 years old. And yes, you can register it in here. If you are Salvadoran and you are coming back, then you have to make sure your car is young. One, and two, you have to. That's part of your when you're crossing the border and you're coming in, that you are moving in with your car, and then you can register your car in El Salvador. If you are a foreigner and you're importing your car, you will need to go through customs first. And in customs, your car will sit there for a little while they are evaluating exactly how much you have to pay in customs. So, and there are people that you can use to help you with the customs process. And if you talk to Living Like a Local, they have some customs agents that can help you with that. How is the traffic and the road in El Salvador? I kind of already covered that. The traffic is only bad in San Salvador, in the capital. The roads are gorgeous, wonderful. They're very similar to the States. They're nice 4-lane highways for the most part. Once you get into the towns, they're paved more with not asphalt paved, but they're more concrete or cobblestone kind of paved in the towns. But in between towns or off of the main highways, you will get more dirt roads. But you don't necessarily need 4-wheel drive, I wouldn't say, unless it kind of says it. The other big thing is get Waze. I know you might have Google Maps, you might have, Apple Maps, you might use that, but honestly, everybody down here uses Waze. So use Waze because Waze, tracks its users, and so that's how you can tell where the traffic is backed up, where there's no Waze users moving. So Waze has been the most reliable. Also, don't use a map, use Waze because there's a lot of one-way streets. And so you may sit there and say, oh, well, I can get from here to here. I just have to turn down this. But that's a one-way going the other way. So, um, yeah, that's my biggest recommendation. I think that's it. And if you are interested in coming down and checking out El Salvador, look up Living Like a Local or come on one of my relocation tours. There's one starting October 14th. There's another one starting November 2nd. And it is 7 days, 6 nights, full immersion into what it's like to live in El Salvador. And we're going to have a great time. And you'll get to see this beautiful country and the awesome transformation that's happening and see if El Salvador is right for you. And even more importantly, if you are right for El Salvador. I am Jenny Adi. La Gringa Salvadoreña, and the concierge host for Living Like a Local. And I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.